Okay. When you say he controls the karate association,
Well, he's the
how many?
head of the organizations.
Okay, so how many schools and how many people are we talking about that would be like that he'd be
I
working
think there are
with?
like 50 million people worldwide studying Japanese martial arts. You know, they have karate schools in Mexico and Iran and, you know, wherever.
Sure,
So
but
we're
I mean,
talking very big organizations
but
here.
couldn't anybody just open a karate school without accreditation? Or are you saying there is an accreditation and that he's at the head of that accrediting
Well,
agency?
if they opened a karate school, they probably got a black belt or something, okay? And they did that by going to some teacher affiliated with this organization.
I see. So there is some sort of centralized authority that you have to appeal to if you want to run a karate school.
Well, if you want to get a belt, you have to study, you know, at one of these accredited schools. Yeah.
I see.
You know,
So nobody could just hang out a sign and say, "Here's a karate school. Here's your black belt," and have you be taken seriously if you wanted to go to a martial arts tournament and actually compete.
well, I mean, if, you know, it's a meritocracy. So if you just, you know, put on a black belt and go to these tournaments and beat people's ass, they'll recognize you.
Okay. But within Japan, maybe in particular, let's say, this guy that you were referring to, Chodoin Daikaku, he is sort of like the kingpin of martial arts groups in Japan.
Yeah, I major kingpin. Let's put it that way.
Now,
and
would
he's
you
also connected to the Japanese self-defense forces. But what you need to realize is that most of the guys I talk to don't want their name or picture out there at all.
Sure, absolutely.
They refuse to let me name them or put out their photograph. But I have introduced them to MI6 CIA types, and they, at that level, they do communicate. Okay.
I know that it's hard to pin you down time-wise. Could you paint for the average listener what your day is like? I mean, how many insiders, how many different people do you think you talk to in a given week right now?
It really depends. But basically, what happens now is I talk to people who are connected to large organizations. Okay. So I have one guy I talk to who I know has strong Pentagon CIA connections. Okay. And then there's another guy I talk to who's definitely Rothschild MI6 connected British royal family type. Okay. And I've confirmed independently these people that, you know, through multiple sources that they're real. Okay.
Sure.
And then there's another guy who I talked to who would be connected to the Japanese right-wing groups as well as the Asian secret societies. And then there's this Chodoin guy I talked to. And then less often, for example, I talk to senior people of the Japanese gangs like the Yamaguchi-gumi or the Inagawa-kai or the Sumiyoshi. And there's a guy I talked to who's a KGB Serbian intelligence type I talk to quite regularly.
From Russia or from Serbia?
He's from, well, originally from Serbia. Okay, I should say more than that.
Right. I don't want to betray your sources at all. So, yeah.
But for example, I know I've gone out drinking with the wife of Prime Minister Khan Naoto many times. She lives in my neighborhood.
Wow.
There's a lot of people I know. So, there has been, though, and I'll mention this, there's been a very, very intensive campaign to make me seem like a flake.
Sure.
And they have a book about as thick as a phone book, a file on me. And they, first of all, they tried to kill me. And then when they realized that there was protection behind me, and that would mean whoever ordered the kill would be killed themselves in retaliation. The next, they tried to drive me into bankruptcy by blacklisting me. And that when that didn't work.
Well, hold on. What do you mean blacklist?
Okay, I used to have regular TV shows in Japan, and I had.
Oh, you did?
Oh yeah, I'm a big primetime shows, and I was able
like
to
on
publish,
NHK or what network?
NHK had a 20-minute special on me in prime time. I
Wow.
had various networks, but the point is, I was also able to publish stories in places that major Western media. But you know, I got put on a blacklist.
Around what time was that? What year?
That would happen, I guess it started around 2005, 2006, after I left Forbes and started writing stuff about 911.
Yeah.
That would be about it.
So 9/11 was your first major book that you put out? Was that was your first book as a
magazine articles, and then I was holding press conference at the Foreign Correspondents Club, explaining why I was writing about 911. You know, just trying to get publicity in the Western media, and that's when I realized that either they were scared of losing their jobs, or they were working for some agency and only pretending to be a journalist. And that the media was controlled. I mean, I already knew it was controlled, but I didn't know how thoroughly controlled it was until I had press conferences about 911 and presented the evidence. And
well, now,
I had people like the New York Times correspondent telling me that he would be fired if he wrote about this. You know.
So your opinion about 9/11 is obviously not Arabs with box cutters. What could you synopsize what was your conclusion that got you in so much trouble? You're obviously not supporting the official dogma around 9/11.
Well, I think the short story is that it's that slogan. It was an inside job. The problem, the evidence is overwhelming, that it wasn't done by a small group of Saudi terrorists with box cutters. But the problem that most people encounter is that if it wasn't, then the implications are so mind-boggling because it involved such a large amount of people and so much planning and so many insiders that people go into a state of denial. Such a conspiracy was too large to be possible. And they just, their minds shut it off.
Well, I also, my major in college was psychology, and I went through a suicide hotline internship, so I have the equivalent of master's just from education. And we learned, especially in crisis counseling, we learned about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
And what it turns out is that when somebody's been traumatized heavily, they create a dissociative partition in their mind. It's like a separate personality that handles the trauma.
Yeah.
And they get very defensive. And typically, if you tell them information that brings up that PTSD, that triggers their trauma, they will attack the messenger because the trauma is so severe that they will do anything not to actually re-experience it.
In any case, if you go back to the history, you realize that, that they've always had to create fake incidents in order to get people fired up into war. This is, you go back to historical cases and people don't have that trauma associated with it. For example, if you look at why the Spanish-American War started, you'll realize it was a fake incident, the blowing up the ship, the Maine,
right,
and blaming it on Spain. Nice headline rhyme there, eh?
Yeah.
And then 70 years later, they say, actually, we blew it up ourselves,
Right.
Well, if we were at the time saying it was done by the Americans, they would have lynched you on the street,
You mentioned a mind-blowing piece of information about the Titanic.
Yeah, I mean, that was, remember a book came out a year before about a ship called the Titan that sank on its maiden voyage, and
right.
They got rid of, in one fell swoop, about 600 industrialists who were opposed to the taking over the Fed, and J.P. Morgan was saying, hey, let's all talk about it while we cross the Atlantic, and of course he missed his ship at the last moment, and they were prevented at gunpoint from boarding the lifeboats,
Well, there's a lot
of stuff that's going to come out, but the conclusion I've reached, and it's really quite mind-boggling, is that